I bought gifts to surprise my wife. The guards laughed and pointed out, her real husband is right there. My blood ran cold.
My name is Julian. For 6 years, I believe my marriage was bulletproof. The morning it unraveled started unremarkably. Lena had left at her usual 6:15, a brush of perfume, and a whispered promise about dinner. I lay in bed another hour, my thoughts drifting to the anniversary that was 2 weeks away. 6 years. Leather or sugar, that was the traditional theme. I'd settled on a vintage watch she'd admired through a shop window months ago, a rose gold piece with a mother-of-pearl face that caught light like a secret. It sat in my nightstand still in its velvet box waiting, but that morning something impulsive seized me. I wanted to see her face when I gave it to her. Not in 2 weeks, but now. Spontaneity, I thought, was the pulse of a good marriage. I showered, dressed in the navy suit she always said made me look distinguished, and tucked the watch box into my jacket. I stopped at the florist for a bundle of white peonies, her favorite, the ones she said reminded her of her grandmother's garden in Charleston. Then I drove across town to the glass and steel tower that housed her company, a mid-sized marketing firm where she'd climbed from account manager to CEO in 5 relentless years. I was stupid with pride. My wife, the CEO. My wife, who still held my face in her hands when she kissed me goodnight. The lobby was cool and clinical, all polished granite and indirect lighting. A security guard sat behind a crescent-shaped desk, broad-shouldered and somewhere in his late 50s, with a face that had seen things and decided most of them were amusing. His badge read, Dempsey. Morning, I said, setting the peonies on the counter. Here to see Lena Maxwell. I'm her husband. Dempsey's eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them. He tapped his keyboard with deliberate slowness. Your name, sir? Julian Maxwell. He typed, frowned at the screen, then looked up with an expression that was neither hostile nor welcoming, just watchful. Sorry, Mr. Maxwell, you're not on her approved visitor list. I can't let you up without authorization. I laughed, because it was absurd. The list must be outdated. I'm her husband. We live together. I made her coffee this morning at 5:45. I can describe the mug if that helps. His face didn't change. Policy. I'll need to call up. Fine, I said, waving a hand. Call. I'll wait. I wanted to surprise her anyway. I winked, tapping the box in my jacket. Anniversary gift. Early. Dempsey reached for the phone, then paused. His gaze drifted past my shoulder toward the elevator bank, and a small, knowing smile settled on his lips. It was the kind of smile that made the back of my neck prickle. Buddy, he said, lowering his voice, I see her real husband daily. Look, he's coming out now. The words landed like a slap. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the gotcha that would dissolve this into an awkward joke. It didn't come. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing with his chin toward the elevators. I turned. A man was walking across the lobby. Tall, early 40s, with a meticulously trimmed beard and a charcoal suit that fit him like it had opinions about his body. He carried a leather briefcase and walked with the ease of someone who knew exactly where he was going and why. He smiled at Dempsey, a quick flash of white teeth, and then his eyes flicked to me. No recognition. Just the brief, automatic assessment men give each other in passing. He pushed through the revolving doors and disappeared into the morning sunlight. That's him, Dempsey said, almost gently. Been coming down like that every day. Sometimes they leave together in the evening. He paused. You really didn't know? I didn't answer. The lobby tilted slightly, then steadied. I felt the weight of the watch box against my ribs, the stems of the peonies dampening my palm. The flowers suddenly seemed obscene, their sweetness cloying. A cold, clear presence settled over me. Later, I would recognize it as survival instinct, sharp as a blade. But in the moment, it felt like stepping outside my own body and watching a stranger take control. I turned back to Dempsey, and I smiled. It wasn't a real smile, but it was convincing. You caught me, I said, spreading my hands. I'm not her husband. I'm someone else. His eyebrows rose. Her brother-in-law, I said, the lie forming effortlessly. I had a suspicion, so I came to see for myself. My brother. I let the sentence hang, heavy with implication. Dempsey studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and grim. I get it. Family business is the worst kind. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice steady. He scratched his jaw. Hard to say exactly. He started showing up maybe 4 or 5 months ago. He's got some sort of ID that gets him straight through. I figured he was a consultant, maybe a partner, but he shrugged. He's here at odd hours, mornings before she's in or leaving right when she does. The way they look at each other, that's not business. I've been doing this job 22 years. You learn to read people. 4 or 5 months. I replayed the last season of my marriage. The late nights, the weekend calls she had to take in private, the new enthusiasm for business trips. I had accepted every excuse like a man swallowing placebos, grateful for the illusion of health. Does she know you're onto them? Dempsey asked. Not yet, I said. And I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention I stopped by. My brother deserves to hear this from me, not from a scene in a lobby." He nodded with the gravity of a co-conspirator. "You got it, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You seem like a decent guy." I picked up the peonies, the stems cool and damp. I looked at them as if I'd never seen flowers before. Then I handed them to Dempsey. "For your desk," I said. They deserve better than what I was going to do with them. He took them, surprised, and I walked out into the sun. I made it to my car, a silver sedan parked 2 blocks away, before the shaking started. I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the leather, and stared at the dashboard without seeing it. The face of the man in the charcoal suit was burned into my mind. I didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him except that he walked through my wife's lobby like he owned it. And apparently, in some sense, he did. The watch box dug into my chest. I pulled it out, flipped it open. The rose gold face gleamed up at me, beautiful and indifferent. I imagined Lena's wrist, imagined this watch circling it, imagined her glancing at it while lying about where she'd been. I snapped the box shut. "Real husband." Dempsey's words echoed. Not the one she came home to, not the one who made her coffee and believed her lies. The real one was the man who got the secret smiles, the midday rendezvous, the truth. I started the car, but didn't drive. My mind was already clicking through options, possibilities, moves, and countermoves. The old Julian would have driven home, poured a drink, and waited for a confrontation that would end in tears and hollow promises. But the old Julian had died in that lobby, replaced by someone colder, someone who understood that grief could be weaponized into patience. I had information. Lena didn't know I had it. That was power. And I intended to use every last volt of it. 3 days. I gave myself 3 days to burn the image of that man into my retina and map the architecture of their betrayal. Every morning I parked across from the tower and waited. I learned his schedule the way a cartographer learns new terrain. He arrived at 8, 15 inches of black Range Rover with tinted windows. He left at noon, sometimes with Lena, sometimes alone. If they left together, they returned separately, always within 20 minutes of each other. A lunchtime routine, I realized. Probably a hotel. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to see the room where my wife became a stranger. I needed something more concrete. Documents, assets, leverage. The gut punch was already delivered. Now came the dissection. At home, I performed normalcy like a stage actor. I kissed her cheek when she came home. I asked about her day. She answered with that effortless fluency she'd perfected. Merger talks, difficult clients, a board member who couldn't read a spreadsheet. I nodded and poured her wine. Some nights I'd catch her watching me with an expression I'd once mistaken for tenderness. Now I recognize it as the absent gaze of someone mentally comparing you to someone else and finding you adequate but not thrilling. The man's name came through a friend who ran a private investigation firm. I paid cash and asked for discretion. 24 hours later, I had a folder. His name was Mark Renshaw. Divorced, 2 children he saw on alternating weekends. He ran a boutique consulting firm that had started billing Lena's company 5 months ago at a rate so inflated it was legally indistinguishable from embezzlement. $400,000 spread across invoices for strategic advisement and brand architecture. Paper trails that led nowhere productive except into Mark's bank account. Lena had been signing off on every one. That was the moment I almost cracked. Not the sex, not the lies, but this. My wife, the woman whose ambition I'd bankrolled through business school, the woman whose student loans I'd helped erase with our joint savings, was now using company money to subsidize her affair. It was transactional. It was grimy. It made my 6 years of loyalty feel like a rounding error. I copied everything. The invoices, the bank records, the timestamps that aligned perfectly with hotel receipts I obtained a week later. I built a binder with plastic sleeves and labeled tabs, the kind of obsessive documentation that would make a divorce attorney weep with joy. Then I called a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Vance, who came recommended as a specialist in matrimonial dissolution involving corporate malfeasance. A mouthful of a title, but she earned it. We met 3 times. Each time, the binder grew thicker. The plan that emerged was elegant in its devastation. Lena's company had a morality clause in her contract, a standard provision I'd skimmed years ago when she signed it. Misuse of company funds, especially for personal or romantic entanglements, constituted grounds for termination with cause. No severance, no stock vesting, no golden parachute. She would lose everything. The title, the salary, the equity that represented 60% of our net worth. Mark's consulting firm relied almost exclusively on her company's contracts. Cut off the host, and the parasite dies too. But Patricia suggested something sharper. Don't just expose her, she said, tapping a pen against the binder. Give her the chance to confess. Document that refusal. It makes the eventual exposure legally unassailable and personally, well, let's say it leaves a deeper mark. On a Thursday evening, I set the stage. I cooked her favorite meal, seared scallops with lemon risotto. I lit candles. I wore the navy suit. When she walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood, She stopped and smiled with what looked like genuine surprise. What's the occasion? Just grateful, I said, pouring wine. 6 years next week. Feels like a milestone worth previewing. We ate. We talked. The risotto was perfect. Halfway through, I set down my fork and looked at her. Lena, is there anything you want to tell me? Anything you've been carrying that you need to get off your chest? Her fork paused midair. A flicker, the tiniest fracture in her composure. Then it healed over. No, she said, tilting her head. What would I have to tell you? You know everything about me, Julian. You always have. It was the most honest lie she'd ever told me. She didn't know me at all anymore. I smiled, lifted my glass. To honesty, then. To honesty, she echoed, and the wine went down smooth. The following Monday, Patricia delivered the binder to the company's board of directors. An anonymous package, though anonymity in these matters is a polite fiction. By Tuesday afternoon, Lena was summoned to an emergency session. By Tuesday evening, she was terminated. No severance. A press release would follow, citing internal restructuring. The board was keen to avoid scandal, but the facts were unavoidable. They acted fast, as boards do, when their own liability hangs in the balance. I waited at home. The front door opened at 7:15, and she stood in the doorway like a woman who'd walked through a hurricane. Her blouse was wrinkled, her makeup was streaked. She held a cardboard box containing the personal effects of a career that had just collapsed. You, she whispered. Her voice was raw, disbelieving. Me, I said. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, the one she'd picked out because it matched the rug. On the coffee table in front of me sat the velvet box with the rose gold watch. I flipped it open. I bought this 2 weeks ago, an anniversary gift. I was going to surprise you at work, but the guard at the front desk told me a fascinating story about your real husband. She flinched as if I'd struck her. Julian, I can explain. It wasn't, don't. My voice came out flat, serene. You don't owe me explanations anymore. You owe me 6 years. You owe me the house, which the lawyer says I'll keep. And you owe me the satisfaction of knowing that when you and Mark Renshaw wake up tomorrow, you'll both be unemployed and exposed. That's a debt I've already collected. She stared at the watch. The mother-of-pearl face caught the lamplight, still beautiful, still indifferent. She reached for it, a reflexive motion, and I snapped the box shut. Not yours, I said. It was meant for the woman I married. She doesn't exist anymore. I stood, placed the watch back in my jacket, and walked past her toward the door. Behind me, in the emptying house, something shattered. A vase, maybe. Her scream followed me down the driveway, raw and unraveling, the sound of a world collapsing under the weight of its own lies. I didn't look back. I got in my car, rested my hands on the steering wheel, and breathed. Not the shallow, panicked breaths of the first day, but the deep, slow rhythm of a man who had carried his grief to its logical conclusion and set it down. The night air was cool through the open window. Somewhere in the distance, a train sounded its horn. The city hummed with its million oblivious lives. I started the engine and drove toward the skyline, the rose gold watch heavy in my pocket, no longer a gift, but a trophy, a reminder that the real husband, the one Dempsey had pointed out with such casual pity, had been standing in that lobby all along. He just needed to be introduced.
She came home to an empty house, and a watch meant for a woman who no longer existed. I finally walked away freely.